If you want a base Rolls-Royce Phantom, Rolls-Royce wants $550,000 from you. No extended wheelbase, no bespoke paint, just the entry price. A Phantom is hand-built in Goodwood, England, and nothing has matched it. Then in 2026, a Chinese phone company built a sedan with the same active safety tech, priced at $244,000, less than half. But before you assume this is another rigged Chinese marketing stunt, you should know it actually is one. Huawei got caught faking the video that made this car famous. The real story is what survives after that video gets thrown out. Start with what the Phantom actually is, because the price only makes sense once you know what you're paying for. Rolls-Royce has built the Phantom since 1925, and the current version rolls out of the Goodwood plant in West Sussex, England, where each car spends several hundred hours in assembly, closer to 2 months on the line before it ships. The paint alone gets several coats and hand polishing between each one. The wood veneer inside is book-matched, meaning 2 adjacent panels are cut from the same tree trunk so the grain lines up like an open book. Buyers can order a Starlight headliner, more than 1,000 individual fiber optic strands woven into the roof lining to fake a night sky, and every one of them is placed by hand. None of that shows up on a spec sheet. It's craftsmanship, and craftsmanship is genuinely why people pay Rolls-Royce prices. But somewhere in the last decade, the Phantom also picked up real technology. Adaptive air suspension, a system Rolls-Royce calls flag bearer that reads the road ahead with a stereo camera and adjusts damping before the car hits a bump, an infrared night vision camera hidden in the grille, a digital instrument display tucked behind glass, and a twin-turbo V12 that still keeps the cabin nearly silent at highway speed. For most of the last century, buying that kind of engineering meant buying German or British. There was no serious alternative from anywhere else, and definitely not from a phone company. That's what makes Huawei's move genuinely strange. Huawei doesn't build cars. It builds phones, telecom infrastructure, and chips, and it's been under a US trade blacklist since 2019 that cut it off from American suppliers. Instead of building its own car brand from scratch, Huawei took a different route. It partnered with existing Chinese automakers and supplied the technology stack underneath, the chassis, the driver assist software, the cockpit software, while the automaker builds and sells the car. That alliance is called HIMA, the Harmony Intelligent Mobility Alliance, and it already has 3 car brands running: Ido with Ceres, Luxeed with Sherry, and Stellato with BAIC. In November 2024, Huawei announced a 4th, and the most expensive one yet, a partnership with Jack Group called Maextro, aimed squarely at the segment Rolls-Royce and Mercedes-Maybach have owned for decades. The first car out of that partnership was the S800. This is where the story gets messy, and where a lot of coverage of the S800 stops early. In early 2025, a promotional video started circulating out of China showing the S800 side by side with a Mercedes-Maybach S680, driving over a shallow pit filled with water, broken glass, and sand. The S800 glided across without disturbing any of it. The Maybach splashed water everywhere and audibly crunched over the glass. A second clip showed both cars attempting a crab walk maneuver and an icy obstacle dodge, with the Maybach losing control and the S800 staying planted. The clips went everywhere. Huawei was showing, not telling, that its air suspension and Turing Dragon chassis architecture outclassed a car costing nearly $1 million more. But then a Chinese auto influencer who goes by Racing Frappuccino started digging. He noticed the comparison didn't add up. The exact water depth in the test pit, 4.5 centimeters, seemed calibrated specifically to let the lighter, faster-moving S800 skim across while the Maybach dipped in. He also found, before and after, photos of the rented Maybach suggesting its tires had been deliberately deflated before filming, which would lower its ride height and make the S800 look more composed by comparison. The Maybach's actual owner said he'd rented the car out for what he was told was a movie shoot, not a competitor's marketing stunt, and that it came back damaged. Huawei didn't quietly retract anything. It sued Racing Frappuccino for $140,000 over his criticism. He said he'd countersue for $340,000. So let's be straightforward about what that means. The suspension test that made the S800 famous was, by the available evidence, staged in Huawei's favor. If you were sold on the car by that clip alone, you were sold something engineered to mislead you, and that's worth saying plainly instead of glossing over it, because a channel that only shows you the flattering version of a story isn't actually informing you. Almost nobody covered the part that came after the lawsuit broke. Throwing out the rig demo doesn't throw out the car underneath it. The S800's suspension hardware, its chassis platform, its sensor suite, and safety systems are documented on regulatory filings, in Huawei's own technical briefings, and in independent teardown coverage that has nothing to do with a staged pothole. Those specs don't care whether Racing Frappuccino was right about the tire pressure. And once you separate the marketing stunt from the engineering underneath it, the actual technology gets a lot more interesting than the fake test ever was. Start with the chassis itself, because this is the part Huawei actually built from scratch. It's called the Tuling Longxing platform, which translates roughly to Turing Dragon, and Huawei describes it as the industry's first independently developed intelligent digital chassis. In practice, instead of a suspension system, a steering system, and a braking system each running their own separate computer, the Turing platform fuses body control, power control, suspension control, steering control, and thermal management into one integrated architecture that can output between 7,000 and 12,000 Newton-meters of torque, distributed individually to each wheel. A conventional car adjusts to the road as it hits a bump. The Turing platform uses cameras and radar to scan the road ahead, build a three-dimensional model of what's coming, and pre-adjust the suspension before the wheel gets there. Huawei calls it spatio-temporal inference suspension, and regardless of how that phrase sounds, the function is concrete. It minimizes body roll going into a turn, stops the nose from lifting under hard acceleration, and reduces nosedive under braking, all calculated in advance rather than reacted to after the fact. The hardware backing that software is just as specific. All versions of the S800 get a closed dual-chamber air suspension with continuous damping control, and the ride height can lift by up to 45 millimeters, useful for clearing a steep driveway or a speed bump without scraping the underbody, a real problem on a car this long. And the S800 is long, 5,480 millimeters bumper to bumper, with a wheelbase stretching 370 millimeters, which actually makes it larger than the standard Phantom. A car that size should be a nightmare to park. Huawei's answer is rear-wheel steering, with the rear wheels turning up to 12 degrees in normal driving and up to 16 degrees in a special maneuvering mode Huawei calls crab walk, which lets the car move diagonally, nearly sideways, into a tight space. The result is a turning radius of 5.05 meters in daily use, tightening to 3.8 meters in the special mode, small enough to complete a U-turn inside 2 lanes. For comparison, a Toyota Corolla, a car roughly a third of the S800's length, has a turning radius around 5.2 meters. The S800 turns tighter than a compact hatchback despite being nearly 18 feet long. None of this is the pothole video. This is a chassis platform Huawei has filed for regulatory approval, demonstrated on video with independent outlets present, and put into production across multiple JAC-built vehicles, not just the S800. Whatever you think about the tire deflation stunt, the engineering underneath it exists on paper, on the road, and in delivered cars, which is a different category of claim entirely. Now look at what the S800 can see, because this is where the price gap starts to look genuinely lopsided. The car runs 32 to 36 sensors, depending on configuration, including 4 192-line LiDAR units, the kind of resolution that can pick out a curb, a pothole, or a dog crossing the road in heavy rain, fog, or dust. At distances a standard camera and radar setup can't reach. Huawei says that sensor fusion increases detection distance in bad weather by 60% and cuts perception delay by 40% compared to the previous generation. The Grand Design trim, launched in June 2026, adds an 896-line roof-mounted LiDAR on top of that, plus a new B-pillar camera, feeding Huawei's latest Chenkun ADS 5.0 driver assist software, a step up from the ADS 4.1 already running in standard S800 units. What that sensor stack actually does is the more interesting part. Huawei built a system it calls the Guardian Angel Active Safety Protection. Most safety tech reacts after a collision starts. This one tries to act in the seconds before one becomes unavoidable. When the system determines a frontal collision cannot be avoided, in drive mode, it automatically adjusts seat posture, tightens the seat belts, rolls up the windows, and unlocks the doors, all before impact, so first responders can get in faster and occupants are already braced. It can execute emergency evasive steering when a collision risk is detected from the front or rear, and at low speeds it can autonomously steer around obstacles rather than just braking for them. After a collision, the car switches to a backup power source, places an emergency call, and reports crash data automatically. Huawei calls the whole framework Gemini Redundant Safety Architecture, and the redundancy is literal. The intelligent driving computer, the low-voltage power supply, the steering actuator, the braking actuator, and the power distribution center all run doubled, so a single component failure doesn't take the whole safety system down with it. A Rolls-Royce Phantom has none of this. It has excellent, well-engineered passive safety, a strong body structure, airbags, and a driver assist suite that's competent by traditional standards. But there's no LiDAR-based pre-collision seatbelt tightening in a Phantom, no automatic pre-unlocking before impact, no low-speed autonomous obstacle steering. Rolls-Royce spent its budget on hundreds of hours of hand assembly and book-matched wood. Huawei spent its budget on sensor fusion and redundant computing architecture. Those are two completely different definitions of what luxury money buys, and for the first time, a Chinese company is putting real numbers behind the second definition at a price nobody in the segment has tried before. It's also worth being clear about where this technology is coming from, because it isn't invented out of nothing. Huawei has spent years selling the same sensor fusion and driver assist stack, called Huawei Ads, across its other HIMA Alliance brands, Ido, Luxeed, and Stellato, in cars that cost a fraction of the S800. The Guardian Angel safety logic and the redundant computing architecture are refinements of systems already logging millions of miles on ordinary Chinese roads. Not a one-off flagship gimmick built to win a single YouTube comparison video. That track record is exactly what the rigged Maybach test obscured. Huawei didn't need to fake a pothole crossing to prove this car has real technology in it. It had years of production data already doing that job and chose a staged stunt anyway, which says more about Huawei's marketing instincts than about the chassis. That distinction matters because it changes what kind of claim we're actually checking. A single staged video is easy to fake and easy to catch, which is exactly what happened here. A chassis platform filed with Chinese regulators, demonstrated in front of independent outlets, and already running in tens of thousands of delivered cars is a much harder thing to fabricate because it has to keep working every day on ordinary roads, not just for the length of one promotional clip. The Racing Frappuccino lawsuit tested the first kind of claim and found it wanting. Nobody has run the same test on the second kind, because the second kind doesn't need a rigged demo to prove itself. There's a pattern worth naming here, because it shows up across a lot of Chinese tech coverage, not just this one car. The flashiest claim, the viral clip, the number that sounds too good, is usually the one that turns out to be exaggerated or staged, because that's the part built for attention. The boring regulatory filing, the delivery count, the torque figure buried in a spec sheet nobody reads, is usually the part that's actually true, because nobody bothered faking paperwork nobody was going to watch. Judge the S800 by the viral test and you get played. Judge it by the filings and the delivery numbers, and you get a much stranger, much more accurate picture of what a Chinese phone company just built. If a channel like this one is useful to you, the subscribe button does the actual work of making sure the next breakdown finds you, instead of getting buried in the algorithm. This channel covers exactly this kind of story every week. The real engineering underneath China's most hyped tech claims, verified against the same skepticism this video just applied to Huawei's own marketing. Now here's where the price gap gets its final and strangest number. Look closer at what $400 actually buys in the Grand Design trim specifically, because Maextro didn't just cut the price and call it a day. The Grand Design, unveiled by Richard Yu at the June 2026 launch event, drops the standard S800's 5-seat layout for a dedicated 4-seat configuration built entirely around rear passenger comfort. The same logic Rolls-Royce and Maybach use when they assume the person paying for the car is riding in the back, not driving it. It adds gold accents across the hood ornament, the wheels, and the badging, a two-tone deep blue-green and silver paintwork option, and pushes the roof-mounted LiDAR up to 896 lines for even finer obstacle resolution. Inside, buyers get zero-gravity rear seats that recline toward a near-horizontal position, a retractable laser projection screen, and a 43-speaker Huawei-tuned audio system. None of that is subtle, and none of it is trying to be. It's Huawei explicitly speaking the visual language of Maybach and Rolls-Royce, gold trim and rear seat theater, while backing it with sensor counts a 100-year-old automaker has never had to compete against. The powertrain underneath is just as deliberately flexible. Buyers choose between a fully electric version and an extended range version that carries its own small gasoline generator to top up the battery on long trips, a hedge against China's charging infrastructure still catching up in some regions. The electric variant uses an 800-volt architecture that Huawei says can add roughly a kilometer of range per second of fast charging under ideal conditions, and the battery can go from 10 to 80% in about 10.5 minutes. A Phantom, by comparison, runs a twin-turbo V12 and gets you to a gas station, not a charger, which for some buyers is exactly the point, and for others is starting to look like the older technology in the comparison. The market has already answered the question of whether any of this works commercially. Within 72 hours of the standard S800 opening pre-orders, Maextro logged more than 2,600 reservations, described at the time as the first Chinese brand to break into the true ultra-luxury segment at scale. By the time the Grand Design launched in June 2026, cumulative S800 deliveries had passed 19,000 units, a number no other Chinese brand has hit in this price bracket, and a number that makes the car impossible to dismiss as a low-volume flagship built purely for headlines. Rolls-Royce, across its entire global lineup of every model it makes, delivered roughly 5,012 cars in all of 2024. A single Chinese sedan model, launched a year earlier, is already approaching 4 times that volume on its own. So go back to the number that started this video. $550,000 for a base Phantom versus $400 for a Maextro S800 Grand Design. That's a gap of $345,600. What is that gap actually buying? Some of it is real, and it should stay real in your head after this video ends. Hand-built assembly at Goodwood, book-matched wood veneer, a Starlight headliner placed fiber by fiber, a brand with a 100-year reputation for never cutting a corner. That's not nothing, and it's not something Huawei or JSE can replicate by writing better software. If what you're buying is heritage and hand craftsmanship, the Phantom earns its price on those terms alone. But if what you thought you were buying was untouchable technology, the kind of engineering only a century-old mark could produce, that part of the premium is getting harder to justify by the month. The S800's Tuling Longxing chassis lifts its own suspension, steers all 4 wheels, and pre-adjusts to road conditions using a road space model built from live sensor data, none of which the Phantom's flag-bearer system does at anywhere near the same level. The S800's Guardian Angel Safety Suite prepares the cabin for an unavoidable collision seconds before it happens, tightening belts and unlocking doors automatically. The Phantom's safety systems, while excellent, are still fundamentally reactive. And the S800 is already a real delivered product. More than 19,000 units sold since its May 2025 launch, not a concept car promising features that might arrive someday. There's also a fair question about whether the S800 can actually hold up over 10 or 15 years of ownership the way a Phantom is expected to, since Rolls-Royce's reputation rests as much on decades of proven long-term reliability as it does on day-one build quality, and Jack Group, the automaker actually assembling the S800 under Huawei's technology, has nowhere near that track record at this price point. Nobody outside China has owned one of these cars long enough to answer that question with any real confidence yet. That's a genuine, unresolved caveat, not a footnote to bury. A phone company's 7-year-old car division financing a luxury brand is a fundamentally different bet than a mark that has been quietly solving the exact same engineering problem since 1904. And long-term durability is exactly the kind of claim a single-staged pothole test can never actually prove either way, no matter who wins it. Western coverage of this story has mostly stopped at the viral clip, either repeating the Chinese car beats Maybach headline uncritically, or once the lawsuit broke, writing it off entirely as another Chinese tech company caught faking a demo. Both versions miss what's actually happening underneath. This isn't a story about who won a rigged pothole crossing, it's a story about a phone company that spent 5 years building an intelligent chassis platform from the ground up, proved it works well enough to sell 19,000 units at Maybach money, and then nearly buried that achievement under a lawsuit over a staged demo. It never needed to fake in the first place. It's also a preview of a pattern likely to repeat across Chinese luxury EVs over the next few years. HIMA already has 3 other brands sharing pieces of this same Huawei technology stack at far lower price points, and each one gives Huawei another shot at refining the chassis, the sensors, and the safety software on real roads before the next flagship ships. A Western automaker building a comparable platform from scratch would need years and a dedicated engineering division. Huawei is iterating across 4 brands and hundreds of thousands of cars at once, which is exactly the kind of scale advantage that turns one surprising sedan into an entire segment shift, whether or not any single comparison video holds up to scrutiny. Go back to where this video started. Huawei got caught rigging a pothole test against a rented Maybach, and that part of the story deserved to be called out plainly, because a company willing to deflate a competitor's tires to win a comparison video is a company you should read carefully going forward. But the chassis platform underneath that rigged demo isn't rigged. It's filed with regulators, it's in 19,000 customers' driveways, and it does things, on paper, that a $500,000 British sedan simply does not do. The real story was never the pothole. It's that a phone company under a US trade blacklist, cut off from American chips and American software, just built a chassis platform sophisticated enough to make 100-year-old British Marquez technology look like it's standing still, and got so eager to prove it that it lied about the one part of the story that was already true enough on its own to not need the lie.